We are very happy to have two speakers today and to discuss the topic about the media in the Somali community. And the first speaker would be Idil Osman. And many of you may know her through Voice of America and other venues. Idil graduated from London Metropolitan University with a BA in journalism and in MA in journalism and creative writing. While at the university, she worked for the BBC radio and she also worked with the Guardian newspaper in London. Currently, she works for the Voice of America in Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I wanted to talk to you about media ethics and mainly focus on truth and integrity in reporting. I want to mention 3 points that I think are very important if we look at this framework and topic that we're discussing today. Firstly, why is it important for media to uphold integrity, ethical behavior, and truthfulness? I also want to look at what causes for media outlets to stray from this. And lastly, how can society have a say in what is covered in the media? So our first section, now the most important asset for journalists and media companies is reputation, their professional reputation, that is. Behaving ethically in a consistent manner and remaining impartial and unbiased, therefore, is at the forefront of attaining good reputation, which they are obviously aiming for with the target audience. This allows the media to connect with their audience and establish a sense of trust, which will ultimately contribute to the growth of that news agency. Now, this is why most, if not all, media agencies in the Western world have a code of ethics. Some actually go a step further. I know in the UK, they have regulating bodies that overlook all the media industries. They also have in-house regulation bodies that are known as ombudsmen. However, in many countries without freedom of press, the majority of people who report the news may not follow the above described standards of journalism. Non-free media are often prohibited from criticizing the national government, and in many cases are required to distribute propaganda as if it was news. Various other forms of censorship may be restricting the reportings of the journalists on issues that the government deems to be sensitive. If we look at the phenomenon of the Somali media in particular, now there's no government that is overlooking their code of ethics and how they practice their journalism. Since the collapse of the Civil War, there haven't been any institutions that have been able to train them on how to conduct journalism. So therefore, they don't know the code of ethics and what to follow and the standards that they should aim for. So this has created a phenomenon of independent newspapers, independent journalists, reporting the news as if, how they see it should be done. They don't get trained on how to do it. So a lot of them would be reporting things like, copying and pasting a news article from Reuters or AP and then putting it on their website and passing that off as news, and then they would classify themselves as journalists. Obviously, this is plagiarism, but this is the problem that happens when there's no institutions that look over the code of ethics and how the journalism is practiced within those companies. Also, the media is a very powerful tool if you are aiming to reach political goals. This can be something that you can use to further your own personal interests, and that's another thing that's a major problem within the Somali media, especially back home. However, remaining truthful is especially important when the news sources cover conflict-stricken areas like Somalia, and areas where there is limited access to sound information. What's even more pertinent here is that Somali's main form of obtaining information is through word of mouth, and there's a heavy reliance, therefore, on media outlets such as radio stations. Straying from the code of ethics, now the question arises if we go back to the mainstream media, how or what makes a media outlet be perceived by the audience or their audience as biased or to be compromising their integrity? After all, their main goal is interest. But there are several reasons for this. Firstly, an economic benefit could be attached to the particular story being covered. Apart from publicly funded media such as the BBC in the UK, and here it be the VOA, a lot of these media companies are privately owned, and thus the shareholders strive to reap the financial benefits of their investment. Therefore, they are at liberty to use the media agencies they have a stake in to further their own personal interest. And a good example would be when the political season and elections hit. Politicians would be seeking to have as much coverage as possible, and that's where a financial gain can be met. In the UK, for example, there are tabloid newspapers known as the red top newspapers that are notorious for sacrificing accuracy and personal privacy in order to boost sales. But they do have a target audience that expects that type of journalism rather than what is known as hardcore news delivery. Another reason lies with the style of journalism a media agency adopts. Other than the big news agencies like the BBC and Reuters and AP and CNN, many media outlets have taken a certain style of how they deliver their stories, and accuracy of news is often sacrificed for this. A few of these styles are literary journalisms, where you see a lot of former journalists that used to work for companies becoming independent or freelance journalists, and they tend to write books about certain issues that they've covered extensively or they have specialized in, and they would write a book about it, but that book would take a form of a literary form, which means a lot of the accuracy would go out of the way and be sacrificed for prose journalism. Now, there's also the new wave of new journalism that is that comes through the internet nowadays. And this new form of journalism tends to reject many of the fundamental ethical traditions in order to express themselves. Blogs are a very good example for that. But again, these media outlets tend to aim and reach a particular audience or market segment. Therefore, they can get away with many ethical issues. Now, the last topic that I want to discuss with you guys is how we as a society can contribute to fostering a healthy relationship with the media so that collectively we have a say in the way stories are being covered. Firstly, we need to take action. A lot of the times what I see is when I go to conferences like this and other events, I see people complaining a lot about the image of the Somalis and how that is very negatively portrayed. You know, we've got Somali kids that have left Minnesota and various other parts of the Western world to go and join Al-Shabaab back home. You've got pirates on this side, you've got corruption going on, you've got a collapsed government, and so on and so forth. So the media is always very crisis-driven, and obviously it has a negative impact on us as a community. But complaining about it and sitting around and discussing it amongst ourselves is not going to further us. It's not going to bring any change. So for any change to take place, that means we need to take action. How do you take action? Firstly, what you can do is develop a relationship with the local media or the medias that you are interested in, the ones whose stories appeal to you. You establish a relationship with them. You connect with them. You get to know the journalists on a one-to-one basis, first-name basis, and that way, it would be an icebreaker for you to discuss the issues that you care about and make sure that you give them an angle that is relevant to them. What I mean by that is, I'll give you an example. When I was at the BBC Radio Leicester back home, I used to work for it's a local radio station, but it had a regional target audience, and we used to focus, I used to work in a program called Into Africa, and we used to focus on the African community within that region. It was mainly Ghanaians and Somalis that used to live there at that time, but there were also a lot of other Western African communities that were there. And there was this lady who used to run a homeless shelter. Very local, nothing big, but she would call us every Saturday without a fail. She would establish the fact that she's a regular listener, which means, that's what we're aiming for. When we put programs out there, we want to establish regular listeners. So she made that first essential connection. Secondly, she had a very good understanding of how the media operates. She would inform us about any kind of small gatherings that she would do, any tea parties, any soup kitchens, anything that was going on, and she would find an angle that would be appealing to us from a story perspective. So for example, if she was having a conference, like a fundraising event, and there was African cultural displays or artifacts that they were portraying, or some sort of cultural exhibition that was going on, and that was focused on, portraying the African traditions, she would inform us, she would tell us about it. And that way, for us, it's a story, it's something that we can cover, other than, the international news and the politics that's going on in Africa. So we would go out there and we would cover her stories. In return, she would, she would receive a platform to create a wider reach. And later on, when she applies for fundings and things like that, she would have an extensive portfolio of coverage and positive contribution that she's making to society. And therefore, a lot of local and regional charities would actually come to her and say, we think that you're doing wonderful work, because they heard it on the radio. So we need to establish that kind of relationship where you come to the media and you don't just complain and say, why are you portraying us as just pirates? We've got people going to school, we've got graduates from here, and yeah, that's all nice, but you do need to let them know and find an angle that is relevant to them and make that connection so that there's a mutual benefit, basically. And lastly, I want to say, give them constructive feedback. Don't just point at the wrongs that you see are there. Just, once you've established that relationship that I was telling you about, what you then can do is develop that relationship where you can talk to them about certain things that you thought were either damaging to the community or anything like that, and then tell them other strategies or other alternatives that they can follow. And then lastly, change only occurs when you take action. I really want to emphasize on that point, because if you don't take decisive action and make that connection for you to move forward, nothing's going to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Adil Usman.
Okay, he said in English. No, I'm not going to say in English. I will say in Somali. And my question to Idil Osman, thank you so much. I think a lot of people don't do the same thing you're doing it as a media person, coming out and speaking to the community and telling what is going on there. Because we don't know anything about it, what you guys do there. A lot of people in the community just blaming you, thinking you guys have a power to change something in Somalia. And I think that should really tell us a lot of things about how the people are thinking in the media. A lot of people maybe blame the leaders of those radio stations, but do we really know that's not belonging to Somali people? There's American government has their own agenda to put the money, Voice of America. The UK government has an agenda to put the money, the BBC, in their agenda. That's what they want to hear. So the people need to understand. So my question is, how we can engage those folks who work in the media to come up to the community to tell what is going on and what is the benefit, what we need to do. You're telling us right now what we need to do, but only you, we need 10 or more than that who can tell everywhere. So how we can engage
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Thank you. Idil, if you can make that in 60 seconds, we would really appreciate that.
No problem. Well, firstly, let me establish one thing. The media will always portray the news, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. It will always tell it like it is. So if pirates are, causing havoc on the Gulf of Aden, we will tell that. So if you feel bad about that, that's just something that's not going to change. Now, how do you make a change? It's to come up to the media. Like I said before, you establish a relationship. I mean a personal relationship. So you call me up, you find my email address, you establish a relationship with me on a professional level, you find out what's going on, you listen, you establish yourself as, that's what we're aiming for. We want to expand our audience, we want to expand our target reach. So you are essential. So once you realize the value that's attached to each and every one of you, you can put that to good use and make the changes that you require.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Establish your own media.
Okay.
Establish your own media. Make sure you put the right people in there.
Okay. This next question, please. If you don't mind, make it 30 seconds. Just a question.
Okay. I wanted to know, can you talk a little bit about the media situation inside Somalia? I mean, is it safe for reporters? A lot of times, it seems like the only news that comes out is it's coming out from the conflict areas. But I mean, the vast majority of the country isn't in conflict. There's no reporting about anything accept the fighting? I mean, there's people that have businesses. You never hear anything about the business situation. Could you tell me why that's the case? I mean, how come there's no reporting from, all the regions as opposed
Thank you,
to
brother.
just the conflict?
Thank you. Why aren't you reporting the good things that are happening in the country?
That's a good point. What I do want to tell you is that, unfortunately, today's media is, like I said before, very crisis-driven. And the issue with Somalia is that the area where most crisis is happening is often what we will focus on, because that is what's portrayed as the headline news. So if a local business has been established in the suburbs of Bur'a, and there's 12 people that have died in a gun attack in Mogadishu, that's going to be our leading story. But that being said, most media agencies have segments that are dedicated to specific areas. So for example, there's an education segment in the VOA I specifically know about. We've got education sections, we've got diaspora programs, we've got business programs that are specifically dedicated to that, to portraying that particular news, which is why it won't take up, that kind of news would not take up the main transmission, because we've dedicated those sections for them. So I would encourage you and everyone else to listen to as much media as you can possibly can, and then you can have an overall image of what's going on, and then you can make a valuable contribution as to what you think as a listener is missing.
Thank you very much. Brother Muhammad, do you have few seconds to add to that question? Okay, anybody else?
This
Yes,
question
Hussein.
for Adil. Well, I have actually two questions. The first question is, what will you suggest to create accountability within the Somalian media? And just to follow up on that, do we actually have investigator journalist who basically goes after the truth to find out? There's a lot of humors going on when somebody says something, and people just go from that point of what he says, and then the meaning has been lost along the way, and which creates a division and problems. So
Thank you, brother.
thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, these are part of the results or the consequences of the civil war. Just like how there's so many other atrocities going on, this phenomenon that you've just described is part and parcel of the problems that have come about from the civil war. So there aren't any regulations or anything that's monitoring whatever news and media that's out there in terms of Somalia. Now, what we need to do is not look at it through Western eyes. You've just looked at it through Western eyes. Is there anyone investigating? That's what you would have in a civilized, governed country. In Somalia, we're struggling to have a functioning government, let alone look at those kind of establishments. Do you see what I mean? So it's got to be a grassroots kind of operation, and then inshallah, we'll work our way up.
Thank you very much. We haven't heard from any of the sisters, so can we please give a chance to sisters to respond, to ask questions? Any sisters back there? I don't want to put you on the spot, so. Okay, Jazakallah khair.
Thank you. I just wanted to just elaborate on what you said, Eden. If you don't like the way the media portrays you, you do have a chance to make your own outlet like Al Jazeera. If you notice how much they've changed the way people portray Islam or Islamic countries, and they haven't just done it by saying, we're waving the Islamic flag. They've gotten established journalists to make sure that their agenda is not just simply saying, oh, this is the Middle Eastern perspective. They are trying to give you the official perspective, and that is a valuable counterbalance to what we see as the bias, whether it's CNN or Reuters or BBC.
Thank
Do
you
you
very
agree?
much.
And the other thing is, when you said the crisis, there's a slogan that if it bleeds, it leads. That means people are only interested in conflict. Unfortunately, the good part won't be covered, whether it's Muslims or Somalia. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Can we get some of the sisters back there?
There's some at the back.
Okay. Do we have any? Okay, Hussein, go on.
This question is for Idil. This question is for Idil.
There's no.
Give him the others one.
All right. This question is for Idil Osman. I'll ask you maybe two questions, and I'll have 60 seconds, so I'll be very quick. Number one, with all the bad news that's coming out from Somalia, how do you stay really sane? How do you how do you really deal with that? And the second thing I want to ask is, how dangerous is it for you to cover Somalia or your family? Or how much do you think about that?
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good point. It is very disheartening, you know, every day. It's almost like you're in an emergency room. So you come in, I remember the first, you know, at the beginning when I first joined the VOA, I had come from The Guardian, and I used to work in the finance section. So I never covered anything to do with harm or conflict or anything beyond that. I mean, you know, the worst thing that I covered was a recession that might be hitting the country, you know? And then I come here, and then every day it's مدفع بهالكان كدع, you know, ضد بهالكان لو حسوقه. It was very, very mind-blowing to begin with. But as you continue, I mean, it's just like doctors that work in an emergency room. You know, every day you see people bleeding and having gunshots to their heads and things like that. You know, it's a shock at the beginning, but you adjust as you go along. Now, in terms of how safe it is to cover news back home, well, we're here, so alhamdulillah, we're not harmed, but the main problem lies with our local reporters on the ground. Now, they are the ones that are really at risk. And I know at the VOA we had a lot of our reporters in Mogadishu, for example, that were just put out of work. They couldn't talk anymore, simply because Al-Shabaab took control of that area, and they decided that none of the international media is going to be based there. So, you know, unfortunately, it's one of the things that we have to deal with today and find ways that we can best look after them and still continue to do our job.
Thank you very much. I think we can spend a lot of hours on this topic. It's a very important topic, but I think in the interest of time, we're just going to take 2 more questions. And so I haven't heard many of you, so please, if you have any questions.
Assalamu alaikum, Sister Idil and Brother Muhammad, for that. My question is to Sister Idil. I mean, if you see the image news that comes from Somalia, we always see, I mean, the piracy and the Shabaab. So as Somali journalists, what's your role to bring a good image from Somalia and reporting and giving a perspective that may be positive to Somali cause? What's your role as a journalist?
Well, it's similar to the question that the brother at the front here asked. Now, the main transmission is obviously going to be taken up by what's going on in terms of current affairs, like what's happening there and then, the latest news. But in terms of creating a positive image or to try and balance things out, we've got segments every day throughout the week that cover, you know, less hard-hitting kind of news. So in terms of the businesses that are developing in the country, if there's any social issues happening, if there's anything that is of positive public awareness that needs to be created, that kind of stuff is usually covered in the segments that we have. So we strive to make sure that we do a lot of those type of segments every week so that we have a balance between what's going on the ground, which is very, very negative, and then also have some positivity that can be injected into that, inshallah.
Thank you. We're going to take just one more question.